something terrifying happening to people who finally choose themselves. Not terrifying in the way you'd expect, but terrifying because everything you thought you knew about living gets turned completely upside down. Carl Jung spent decades studying thousands of patients who went through this transformation, and what he discovered will shake you to your core. You see, most people go through their entire lives never actually choosing themselves. They choose what their parents want. They choose what society expects. They choose what feels safe, what looks good, what everyone else is doing. But Jung discovered that there comes a moment, usually triggered by crisis, loss, or unbearable emptiness, when something inside you snaps and says enough. Enough pretending, enough performing, enough living someone else's life. When you finally choose yourself, really choose yourself, Jung observed a pattern so consistent it became predictable. First comes the terror, then comes the dying, then comes something so profound that most people can't even comprehend it until they experience it themselves. Today I'm going to walk you through exactly what Jung discovered happens when you stop abandoning yourself and start claiming your authentic existence. But I need to warn you, this isn't about self-help or positive thinking. This is about psychological transformation so complete that the person you are now might not survive it. Jung called this process individuation, and he discovered it's not optional for anyone who wants to live a meaningful life. It's the difference between existing and actually being alive. Here's what Jung realized that changes everything. Most people think they're living their own lives, but they're not. They're living what Jung called a persona, a mask designed to get approval, avoid rejection, and fit into society's expectations. The persona isn't evil. It's necessary for survival. But Jung discovered something shocking. The stronger your persona becomes, the more you lose touch with who you actually are underneath it. Le sign blows. Think about it. How much of what you do every day is genuinely you versus what you think you should do? How many of your opinions are actually yours versus what you've absorbed from others? How many of your goals come from your authentic desires versus what success is supposed to look like? Jung found that most people spend decades building elaborate personas while their true selves slowly suffocate beneath the performance. But here's where it gets interesting. Jung observed that life has a way of forcing this choice upon you. You can't maintain a false self forever without consequences. The psyche has its own intelligence, its own agenda, and it will eventually demand authenticity whether you're ready or not. This demand usually comes through what Jung called compensation. The unconscious starts compensating for the one-sided conscious attitude. If you've spent years being the good girl, you might suddenly find yourself drawn to rebellion. If you've been the responsible one, you might start craving freedom. If you've been the strong one, you might find yourself needing to be vulnerable. This isn't breakdown, it's breakthrough attempting to happen. Your psyche is trying to restore balance by bringing forward the parts of yourself you've rejected. Jung documented this pattern in case after case. A successful businessman who'd spent 40 years climbing the corporate ladder suddenly couldn't get out of bed. Not from depression, but because his authentic self was refusing to participate in the performance anymore. A woman who'd been the perfect mother and wife for 20 years found herself consumed with rage she couldn't explain. Her rejected parts were demanding recognition. The choice to finally choose yourself usually comes at this moment of crisis, when the persona stops working, when the mask becomes too heavy to carry, when the performance becomes more painful than the fear of being authentic. Jung observed that people either choose themselves at this point or they double down on the false self, often leading to what he called neurosis, a split between who you are and who you're pretending to be. But for those who choose themselves, who finally say yes to their authentic existence, Jung discovered something remarkable happens. The first stage is what he called the dissolution of the persona. The mask doesn't just come off, it disintegrates. Everything you thought defined you starts falling away. Your roles, your identities, your certainties, all of it becomes fluid. This is where the terror comes in. Jung observed that people in this phase often feel like they're dying, and in a psychological sense they are. The self you've known is dissolving to make room for the self you actually are. But most people have been identified with their personas for so long, they can't tell the difference between the mask dying and themselves dying. One of Jung's patients described it perfectly. I woke up one day and didn't recognize my own life. My job felt like a costume I couldn't take off. My relationships felt like scripts I was tired of reading. Even my own thoughts felt borrowed from someone else. I wasn't depressed. I was finally awake. And being awake in a life that isn't yours is the most disorienting experience imaginable. Jung found that this dissolution phase can last months or even years. You might quit your job without knowing what you want to do instead. You might end relationships that suddenly feel inauthentic. You might lose interest in activities that once defined you. From the outside, it looks like you're having a breakdown. From the inside, you're having a breakthrough into reality. But here's what Jung discovered that most people miss. Choosing yourself isn't just about rejecting what's false. It's about integrating what's been rejected. Jung called this shadow work, the process of reclaiming the parts of yourself you've disowned. The shadow isn't just your dark side, it's everything you've decided is unacceptable about yourself. If you've always been nice, your shadow contains your capacity for healthy anger. If you've always been rational, your shadow holds your emotional intelligence. If you've always been giving, your shadow contains your ability to receive. Jung found that true individuation requires embracing these rejected aspects, not because they're good or bad, but because they're yours. This integration process is where the real transformation happens. Jung observed that as people reclaim their shadows, they don't become darker, they become more complete. They don't lose their goodness, they gain authenticity. They don't become selfish, they become self-possessed in the truest sense. A woman Jung worked with had spent her entire life being agreeable, never causing conflict, always accommodating others. When she finally chose herself, she had to integrate her capacity for disagreement, for conflict, for saying no. She didn't become mean. She became real. She didn't lose her kindness. She gained boundaries. She didn't become selfish. She became someone who could genuinely choose to be generous rather than being compulsively giving. Jung discovered that this integration phase brings what he called enantiodromia, the emergence of opposite qualities. The people-pleaser discovers their inner rebel. The control freak finds their capacity for surrender. The perfectionist embraces their beautiful imperfection. This isn't becoming someone else, it's becoming whole. But Jung also observes something most people don't expect. Choosing yourself doesn't make you more popular. In fact, it often makes you less popular, at least initially. When you stop performing the persona others are comfortable with, when you stop playing the roles they need you to play, some people don't know how to relate to you anymore. Jung found that authentic people often go through a period of social isolation, not because they're antisocial, but because they can no longer participate in unconscious social dynamics. They can't pretend to agree when they don't. They can't perform happiness when they're not happy. They can't maintain relationships based on false premises. This isolation isn't permanent, but it's often necessary. Jung called it the hermit phase of individuation. You need time away from external influences to discover who you actually are, without the constant pressure to be who others want you to be. You need space to hear your own voice without the noise of everyone else's expectations. During this hermit phase, Jung observed something extraordinary happening beneath the surface. While it looks like withdrawal from the world, it's actually the deepest engagement with reality you've ever experienced. You're finally meeting yourself without intermediaries. No audience to perform for, no roles to maintain, no masks to keep in place. Just you, stripped down to your essential nature. Jung documented that people in this phase often experience what feels like a complete personality reorganization. Values you held for decades suddenly feel hollow. Dreams you chased for years lose their appeal. Relationships you thought were solid reveal themselves as transactions based on your persona rather than genuine connection. It's disorienting because everything you used to navigate life by no longer applies. But here's what Jung found fascinating. This isn't random chaos. There's an intelligence at work, what he called the self with a capital S. Not your ego, not your conscious mind, but a deeper organizing principle that's been guiding your life from beneath awareness. The self has been waiting patiently for you to stop running, stop performing, stop abandoning yourself so it can finally emerge. Jung observed that once people stop fighting this process and start trusting it, something remarkable shifts. The terror transforms into curiosity. The dissolution becomes creative destruction. The isolation becomes sacred solitude. You start recognizing that everything falling away needed to fall away. Everything you're losing was never really yours to begin with. One of Jung's most profound insights was that choosing yourself triggers what he called compensation from the unconscious. Your psyche starts presenting you with dreams, synchronicities, and inner experiences that guide the transformation. It's as if your deeper intelligence has been waiting for this moment of authentic commitment to yourself to reveal the roadmap you've needed all along. The dreams become more vivid, more symbolic, more instructive. You start noticing meaningful coincidences that seem to confirm you're on the right path. Inner figures emerge in meditation or active imagination, offering wisdom you didn't know you possessed. Jung found that people going through authentic individuation often develop what seems like intuitive knowing about their next steps. But Jung also discovered something that surprised him. Choosing yourself doesn't lead to selfishness or narcissism as many fear. Instead, it leads to what he called ethical individualism. when you're no longer performing for approval or acting from unconscious compulsion. Your actions become genuinely ethical because they arise from consciousness rather than programming. The people Jung studied who successfully individuated became more considerate of others, not less, more generous, not more selfish, more connected to humanity, not more isolated. But their goodness became authentic rather than performative. Their kindness arose from fullness rather than emptiness. Their service to others flowed from self-possession rather than self-abandonment. Jung observed that this transformation happens in waves. You'll have periods of clarity followed by periods of confusion. Moments of profound peace interrupted by episodes of intense emotional processing. Times when you feel incredibly strong, alternating with times when you feel completely vulnerable. This isn't inconsistency. It's integration happening in real time. Each wave brings deeper layers to the surface. Childhood wounds that shaped your persona demand healing. Family patterns that limited your authenticity require conscious breaking. Cultural conditioning that kept you small needs to be questioned and released. Jung found that true individuation is archaeological, uncovering and healing layer after layer of accumulated inauthenticity. The people Jung worked with often described feeling like they were becoming themselves for the first time. Not becoming someone new, but remembering someone they'd always been beneath the layers of adaptation and performance. Like an artist removing paint from a masterpiece that had been painted over, revealing the original work of art underneath. Jung discovered that this remembering process brings with it tremendous energy. The life force that had been bound up in maintaining false personas gets released and becomes available for authentic living. People report feeling more creative, more passionate, more alive than they have in years or even decades. But this energy feels different from the driven energy of the ego. It's more sustainable, more peaceful, more connected to something larger than personal ambition. This is when Jung observed the emergence of what he called the transcendent function, a capacity to hold opposites in creative tension rather than choosing sides. You can be strong and vulnerable simultaneously, confident and humble, independent and connected, serious and playful. The either-or thinking that dominated your persona-identified existence gives way to both and consciousness. Jung found that people who reach this stage of individuation develop what he called psychological objectivity about themselves. They can see their patterns without being controlled by them, recognize their triggers without being overwhelmed by them, understand their limitations without being diminished by them. This self-awareness isn't critical or harsh, it's compassionate and realistic. But perhaps most remarkably, Jung observed that people who truly choose themselves develop an unshakable sense of inner authority, not arrogance or superiority, but a quiet confidence in their own perceptions, decisions, and path. They stop looking outside themselves for validation or direction because they've developed an internal guidance system based on their authentic nature rather than external expectations. This inner authority manifests in subtle but profound ways. You stop explaining yourself to people who aren't genuinely interested in understanding. You quit defending decisions that feel right to your deeper knowing. You cease apologizing for taking up space in the world. Not from aggression or defensiveness, but from a simple recognition that your existence is legitimate and your perspective is valid. Jung documented that people in this stage often experience what feels like coming home to themselves. The restless searching that characterized their earlier years settles into peaceful presence. The anxiety about not being enough transforms into acceptance of being exactly who they are. The fear of not belonging dissolves into the recognition that they belong to themselves first and foremost. The external changes during this phase can be dramatic or subtle, but they're always authentic. Some people make radical life changes, leaving careers or relationships that no longer fit. Others make smaller adjustments, bringing more authenticity to existing structures. The key isn't the scale of the change, but the consciousness behind it. Jung observed that these changes aren't reactive or rebellious, like they might have been earlier in the process. They're responsive and considered. You're not running away from something, you're moving toward your authentic life. The decisions feel inevitable rather than forced, natural rather than dramatic. But Jung discovered something that fundamentally challenges everything we believe about success. What the world considers successful, about how society functions. You don't become immune to manipulation, thinking happiness. When you finally choose yourself completely, you become something far more dangerous. Your need for approval, your fear of rejection, operates on your desperate hunger to belong. Every advertisement, every social expectation, every cultural norm depends on you not knowing who you truly are. Because if you knew, really knew, you couldn't be controlled by external forces anymore. Jung observed this immunity developing in his individuated patients with fascination and concern. They'd sit in his office describing how they could no longer be moved by the usual motivators. Peer pressure felt irrelevant. Status symbols lost their appeal. Even criticism from authority figures bounced off them like rain on a window. One patient, a former marketing executive, told Jung something that haunted him. I went to a company meeting yesterday and watched about campaigns designed to make my colleagues get excited, feel inadequate so they'd buy products they don't need. I used to be one of those colleagues. Now I felt like I was watching a different species. I couldn't participate in the manipulation anymore because I could see it so clearly. Jung realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in human psychology. People who had completed the individuation process weren't just psychologically sovereign. They had developed logically healthy. They were psychic, what he called conscious immunity to collective possession. Here in a state of unconscious participation's what Jung meant by that. Most people live in collective dynamics. They adopt opinions without examining them. They pursue goals without questioning their origin. They react emotionally to triggers without understanding why. They're psychologically permeable, constantly absorbing and expressing collective unconscious material without awareness. But individuated people develop psychological boundaries that Jung found remarkable. They could observe collective emotions without being swept up in them. They could witness social trends without feeling compelled to participate. They could listen to propaganda without being influenced by it. Not because they were cynical or detached, but because they had developed their own inner compass. Jung documented this phenomenon during the rise of fascism in Europe. While entire populations were being swept up in collective hysteria, he noticed that certain individuals remained psychologically untouchable. These weren't necessarily intellectuals or political dissidents. They were people who had done the deep work of knowing themselves so thoroughly that external manipulation couldn't find purchase. They developed what Jung called differentiated consciousness, the ability to distinguish between their own thoughts and absorbed thoughts, their own emotions and projected emotions, their own desires and implanted desires. This differentiation created a kind of psychological firewall that protected them from mass possession. But Jung also observed something troubling about this immunity. Society doesn't know what to do with people who can't be manipulated. They become problems for systems that depend on unconscious compliance. They ask uncomfortable questions. They refuse to participate in collective delusions. They won't stay silent about obvious contradictions. Jung watched his individuated patients struggle with what he called the burden facades that others accept of consciousness. They could see through social psychological games that others played unconscious without question. They recognized Yesli. They understood hidden motivations that others denied even to themselves. A woman Jung worked with described the isolation this created. I go to dinner parties and listen to people complain about problems they're actively creating. I watch friends chase things that are making them miserable. I see family members destroying relationships through patterns they refuse to acknowledge. And I can't pretend I don't see it anymore. But I also can't point it out without becoming the problem. Jung called this the curse of Cassandra. In Greek mythology, Cassandra was given the gift of prophecy but cursed so that no one would believe her predictions. Individuated people often feel similarly cursed. They can see what's coming, understand what's happening, recognize patterns others miss, but they're rarely believed or welcomed for this clarity. This is why Jung observed that truly individuated people often appear ordinary on the surface. They learn to move through the world without constantly challenging others' illusions. They develop what he called conscious adaptation, the ability to participate by them. They in social structures without being possessed might work conventional jobs while maintaining inner freedom. Engage in small talk while preserving their deeper thoughts. Follow social conventions while staying true to their authentic values. From the outside, they look normal. From the inside, they're living in a completely different reality. Jung discovered that this conscious adaptation requires tremendous skill. You have to learn to speak multiple languages simultaneously. The language of your authentic self and the language of collective unconsciousness. You have to navigate between worlds, honoring both your inner truth and outer responsibilities. But Jung also found that individuated people develop an almost supernatural ability to attract others who are ready for authenticity. They become what he called magnetic to consciousness. People going through their own individuation process sense something different about them and feel drawn to their presence. Not everyone, Jung emphasized. Most people actually feel uncomfortable around fully individuated individuals without knowing why. There's something unsettling about being near someone who isn't seeking your approval, isn't competing with you, isn't projecting onto you. It highlights your own inauthenticity in ways that can feel threatening. but for those ready to begin their own journey of choosing themselves. Individuated people become like lighthouses in the storm. They provide living proof that authentic existence is possible. They demonstrate that you can be yourself without apologizing. They show that psychological freedom isn't just a concept, it's an achievable state. Jung observed that individuated people often become inadvertent teachers simply by existing authentically. They don't preach or proselytize. They don't try to convince anyone of anything. They simply live from their truth so consistently that others begin to question their own facades. The transformation Jung witnessed in people who fully chose themselves extended beyond psychology into what he called spiritual maturity. They developed a relationship with what he termed the numinous, the sacred dimension of existence that most people only glimpse in peak experiences. But their spirituality wasn't religious in the conventional sense. It was more like a constant awareness of being connected to something larger than their individual ego. They lived with a sense of purpose that wasn't grandiose or self-important, but felt deeply meaningful to them personally. Jung found that this spiritual dimension emerged naturally from the individuation process. When you've integrated your shadow, dissolved your false personas, and made contact with your authentic self, you inevitably encounter what he called the transpersonal dimension of the psyche. You start having experiences that can't be explained by personal psychology alone. Dreams that seem to come from beyond your individual unconscious. Synchronicities that feel like communication from a larger intelligence. Intuitive knowing that proves accurate in ways that surprise you. But Jung was careful to distinguish this genuine spiritual emergence from spiritual bypassing. Individuated people don't use spirituality to escape human reality. They use it to engage more deeply with life. They don't transcend their humanity, they finally inhabit it fully. Jung observed that people who had completed significant individuation work developed what he called ethical spontaneity. Their actions arose from a deep sense of rightness rather than from rules or expectations. They became naturally ethical because they were acting from consciousness rather than ethical spontaneity manifested in Dissolution. This that often surprised others. They might break social conventions to honor deeper truths, refuse opportunities that looked good but felt wrong, make sacrifices that seemed irrational but aligned with their values. Their choices didn't always make sense from the outside, but they were internally coherent. Jung documented that this inner coherence created a kind of personal integrity that was unshakable, not rigid or inflexible, but consistently authentic. They became people whose word could be trusted completely because they'd learned to trust themselves completely. The ripple effects of this transformation extended far beyond the individual. Jung the Stable observed that individuated people hazing effect on groups and organizations. They couldn't be drawn into collective hysteria or manipulated into supporting destructive agendas. They became what he called conscious anchors and most remarkably, Jung found an unconscious world. But perhaps that people who fully chose themselves developed an almost mystical capacity to help others do the same. Not through advice or intervention, but through their mere presence. Something about being near someone who had claimed their authentic existence gave others permission to begin claiming theirs. Jung called this phenomenon contagious consciousness. Authenticity, he discovered, was infectious in the best possible way. When you finally choose yourself completely, you become a walking invitation for others to do the same. The tragedy, Jung realized, was how rare this complete choosing of oneself actually was. Most people lived and died without ever making contact with their authentic nature. They spent their entire existence performing roles, meeting expectations, and avoiding the very thing that would set them free. But for those brave enough to embark on this journey, Jung discovered that choosing yourself wasn't just a personal transformation. It was an act of service to the collective unconscious. Every person who individuated made it slightly easier for the next person to do the same. Jung's warning echoes through every life that settles for performance over authenticity. When you finally choose yourself, you don't just transform your existence, you become living proof that psychological freedom is possible. Your individuation becomes a gift to humanity itself, showing others that they too can stop abandoning themselves and start claiming their birthright of authentic existence.